Welcome to That Good Fight, a Reformation for Gentlemen. My name is Aaron Edwards. I'm joined as ever by Nathan Paler.
Hello.
And our newest entrant, Tom Chaldecott.
Hello.
Greetings, gentlemen. How are we doing today in sunny Derbyshire?
Good.
Well,
Yeah, summer has finally arrived. Well,
enjoying the weather.
No, I
No,
live in
hasn't.
hope.
That's it.
Yeah.
The climate emergency has not benefited us. We're supposed to even benefit from global warming. Aren't we supposed to be getting warmer?
It's certainly lovely out
But,
there right now.
It looks warm,
Fun
but
out.
I was just reading outside and
Yeah.
it's windy and chilly. So yeah.
welcome to the UK.
Yeah.
Welcome to the UK. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. In fact, I heard Tucker Carlson slate the weather in the UK recently when he was that clip you sent me about the him talking to the Australian
Did
media.
you touch on the weather?
Yeah, he was having a go at probably Boris Johnson, and then complaining about rainy London and what a terrible place London is. I mean, everyone's having a go at London now.
I mean,
'cause
London is pretty awful, in all fairness.
It's lovely and terrible. Like it's like
Yeah.
I love
Yeah,
visiting
you're right.
London.
You go for a day and then you leave.
But it
You are aware
it reminds me of
any-
how much
Yeah.
is,
You're
we've
aware
lost.
that any Americans listening think we live in London.
Yeah.
You do know that.
the Queen.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, she is just down the road.
Yeah.
Literally. That's
Wait.
she's down the M1 and the M25 a bit, you know.
I'm dead.
Sorry. Her
God save the Queen.
Her coffin
Rest
is.
her soul.
That's right. Indeed. Yes. So, but how do we ever segue to that? There's a kind of segue.
Yeah.
Because the loss of the reason London is becoming a terrible place for many is because it has been taken over by many of the ideologies in our world. So the fall of London or the decline of London is a kind of symbol for the decline of the West in general, and the encroachment of multiculturalism, which is not just a sense of, hey, let's not be unkind and unwelcoming to other people from other cultures. It's actually more like, let's take over a lot of the foundations of what Western civilization is and was, and those foundations are actually Christian. And so then you get Christians going, we should be multicultural and therefore allow London to become Londonistan, as many have called it, because, it's actually nice and welcome the sojourner, etc. I'm making a terrible job of this segue because that actually would be a really good segue to a whole episode on multiculturalism, and this is not that. This we'll do that another time, but we are doing something relating to the expansion of the kingdom. So how do you actually challenge? One way to challenge multiculturalism is to care about a Christian culture, and how do you actually make culture? And one of the ways to make culture is to make an imprint in the economy, in the world of business. And so we've often gone, well, that's something over there. Business is there for people to make money and tithes to the church, and then we'll get on with the kingdom work, which is just making the church bigger and better. And that hasn't worked all that successfully in recent decades, and it hasn't really made an imprint on the culture. It hasn't stopped places like London losing the glory of Christendom, which they held so and shone so brightly in many previous generations. And so what can we do about that, gentlemen?
Yeah.
And we have actually a great example because we have someone who's fresh from the galleon across the Atlantic Ocean. I think you did travel by galleon, I hope.
Oh,
Tom.
I wish.
I hope you went. That's right, 8-week George Whitfield style visit.
My wife would appreciate not doing that.
Not doing it. Actually, it was 6 weeks. Actually, 4 to 6 weeks. Whitfield used to travel with.
Yeah.
But he used to say on there. You might remember this from various readings.
Oh, yeah.
That was Whitfield's kind of rest time, because he only had to preach once a day on the ship.
That is
I mean, I was just like, in terms of Protestant work ethic, do you get a
that's
higher
amazing.
example of Protestant work
Well, I
ethic
think
than
I'm going
only
to
preach
jump
once a day?
in with a bit of a pitch.
Go on.
So one of the things that I'd like to see, so I run a small business.
Can I just briefly say,
Go on then.
you were in America for a conference, and we'll get back to that.
Well, I was going to introduce
Go
that
on,
bit.
I'll believe
So I run a small business. I'm wanting to, we did an episode on this, and wanting to see and encourage other Christian men to take dominion in their workplace, but also join and create a bit of a voice, find other Christian men in business and work out, how are we faithful in what we do in our businesses, whether it be kind of writing business policies or just how we engage with our staff, who our suppliers are, etc. And I mean, the church or the state of Christianity in the UK, I think I've realised that we're not going to find that easily. So I was over in the States, in fact, with Aaron in March, and got chatting with someone out there, and then introduced to someone else who was running a conference around work. So I was out in Texas last week, came back on Monday, And that really was a discussion around kind of what does it look like to be faithful Christians within the workplace, so kind of vocationally, but also like what does it look like to run a business? Now the States is really interesting in that they're built on a pioneering spirit, and the UK interestingly is not. And what you then see out there is like I stayed with a family who he used to be a pastor of the church there, and they out of their garage were just running like a drop shipment business, and everybody was running these kind of like niche little side hustles, and people just get on with stuff. I mean, entrepreneurialism is rife out there. There is a downside to this. Like the flip side of it is with that kind of get-go spirit, quality can sometimes be lacking. And I think within my work, I definitely see that, particularly in America. But their approach to kind of taking dominion, building things, and involving their families and blessing their families through it is just incredible. And I really wish that in the UK we would kind of reap some of that. But we are really the flip side. Like in contrast, I'm talking to them about, I left employment with like 36 days holiday and we only work 37 and a half hours a week. And they're just like, that sounds crazy. So in comparison, we're like socialist.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
it's nuts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose that's a quick.
No, good way. Yeah, and of course, in many ways, I mean, they are our pioneers. I mean, they are the pioneers who came.
I suppose
from...
they took them all.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of genuinely. I mean, I think I was chatting to Eric Conn when we were at that conference in Texas in the Right Response Ministries in March, and him kind of looking at. Well, they're all looking at. They're looking at like the history of British pioneers and missionaries, as well as culture makers and kings like Alfred, etc. Going like, what happened, guys? Looking at London today, or looking at British politics today, we have lost a lot of our pioneers. But I think you're right. Actually, there's rarely said what you just noted, that there is it's not like an inalienable kind of goodness that doesn't have any downsides. There are problems. I think we could do with far more of the pioneering spirit back here, but there is a kind of loss to the maybe the tradition, what it means to be part of an institution and continue that. We see that we've now allowed those to become bureaucracies, which is terrible. But at the same time, there is a value in some of those long-held generational things which go beyond just the localized. Because America, in other senses, has also descended into massive corporations, hasn't it? Which then, ironically, undo the very ability of the pioneering spirit. So they're overwhelmed by bureaucracy and poor quality. And that's why it's kind of exciting to hear about Christians, bursting forth in sort of new ventures, etc. Like the New Founding Project, for example, that linked to American reform.
A lot of this in the UK, well, particularly within the church, I suppose. Let's talk about that. In that, this is kind of fed by that idea that as a man, if you're kind of really godly, you end up in the clergy. You end up in the pulpit, and there kind of is no discussion about what else do you do. With that kind of dualism, pietism, kind of taken to the nth degree, it means that your work doesn't mean anything. How much does your family even mean to you? And you end up in a sense of loss. Like what do you do with that?
It's really that you don't have a vision for those things. It's like no Christian is going to go, my family doesn't mean anything, my business or work or career doesn't. They literally live as if the career matters and is fulfilling to them. Every man who has a job does not want. Well, okay, let's not every man. Every Christian man who's not a complete, ne'er-do-well, to use a phrase from old Victorian novels, is wanting to succeed and actually finds a sense of God-given fulfillment in achieving stuff and being ambitious and not losing. So whatever job you have, or even if you don't have employment, or if you're self-employed or whatever, no one wants to fail. You don't want to let people down and do a bad job. That should be something we cultivate in our sons, for example, especially. I have to speak that with my 10-year-old at the moment, just doing a job around the garden, and I say, has that got, we've got this phrase, and I was like, has that got the Malachi seal of approval? And I think it looks fine. It's like, has it got the Malachi seal of approval? Because when I go and look around it, I want you to imagine that you're me looking around it. Because if you can't learn to tidy the lounge properly, then your work will not be seen as worthwhile. I don't want someone to go one day, Malachi's done it. I'm not sure if it's actually going to be well done. So it's really hard to train people in that. But that's actually what a kind of godly approach to work is. And but we haven't had a vision for that, have we? No. Theologically, there's been no vision.
And what do you do with ambition in there as well?
Yeah.
Without that, and this is kind of the issue. if we're not encouraged that ambition is a good thing, that building businesses is a good thing, that there is a vision beyond kind of 10 minutes time or next Tuesday, like what is behind that to kind of motivate you to engage with those institutes and kind of build?
Yeah, absolutely. Nathan, just say things.
Say something. Say anything.
Things. No,
I'm just listening.
Yeah, sorry. No,
I'm listening because it's interesting. Oh, okay.
I'm sure you have some Latin, something. Say something Latin.
Say something in Latin, yeah, of course. Labor me vocat. Work calls
just
me.
start talking.
Yeah,
we don't know Latin.
I can say anything. I've got to say anything.
We're not going to check.
Exactly.
No, it's fine.
So there's several interesting things, aren't there? I mean, we've talked about the Reformation before on previous podcasts. Well, what we're talking about is a direct result of the Reformation, this theology of vocation for the ordinary man. That is a very Reformation idea. It's arguably one of the largest inheritances that we have from the Reformation. This sense that every single man and woman has a vocation by the Lord, women in the home, men in the workplace. You know, this notion that it isn't, as you're saying, Tom, it isn't just a clergy laity distinction that breaks down in the face of the priesthood of all believers. And so Calvin and Luther will talk in terms of the man with his shovel in the ground having as worthy a vocation as any priest. And this is what is given. It basically sanctifies the world, not just the church. It sanctifies everything around it. Now, following from that, I was really intrigued by what you were saying before, Tom, about being in America. And exactly where does this come from then? Where has the American pioneering spirit come from? I think you guys are right. You know, when you're talking about 1620, the Puritans go over, take many of our best pioneers. But, I mean, inherent to the American vision is the idea of A, doing something on your own, B, adventuring into a new space and making it your own, and C, surviving, if necessary, on your own. And therefore, that leads to handing this down to your son, in part as a blessing, but also as if you don't do this, your mum and I are going to die. So it continues. Because there's more space, there's more opportunity. Whereas here in the UK, I mean, look, Americans will love the fact that we have pubs. What were those? Public houses. What does that mean? Houses that were opened up, especially prior to the Industrial Revolution. Houses that were open, like this one, for example, that we're in. Houses that were opened up.
You
maybe
do have quite a lot of whiskey on them.
Indeed, I do. In all fairness, behind the camera, neatly out of sight.
You actually could be a barman.
In all fairness, on the Welsh dresser. I mean, say a man or a woman would open up their home and would make their house available to sell liquor or to sell food, sell booze, I should say, ale, properly speaking. And even, for example, dames' schools, how an older woman might open up got a tractor coming by, rural Derbyshire on site. There you go. Workers.
Someone's doing some work.
Exactly. Not us. We're recording a podcast. So they'll open up their school. They'll open up their home as a school and they'd make money that way. And so in other words, we used to have it. So the real question is, where is it gone? Well, of course, it hasn't disappeared entirely, but why is it diminished? We could say quite a bit. You know, there has been a pioneering spirit. Let's say, for example, the Industrial Revolution. We started that. That's British. So men like Richard Arkwright, who is nearby here at Cromford Mills, you know, he set that up. He wasn't a nobleman. He was son of an ordinary bloke in an ordinary family. He set that up off his own back. And yes, there are circumstances of history that made it possible or more likely, but he set that up. But what you see as a result of the Industrial Revolution is almost like a contracting out to, you know, of employee. I'm not meaning to apply like a Marxist lens here. I'm not going to do that. But what I mean is you have people who simply go to work. And you go to work in these factories which increasingly become lit by electricity. You go to workhouses that open for a certain amount of time and you go home. And it's slowly over time, it disconnects the ordinary person from their workplace. They're either working in the field or working again out of a home or out of a house.
Cottaging industry,
etc. And after the Industrial Revolution, and yes, of course, there are abuses, government begins to get more and more involved and passes legislation. And why am I even mentioning that? Over time, of course, poor law, relief law, workhouses, etc., and it goes on into the 20th century. Well, effectively, what it does is it creates a managerial class. And that, in large part, is what we see here in the UK. We have a very managerial, technocratic culture. You go to work and you sit at a desk and you do your job, you count, you crunch the numbers, and you go home. And there isn't the same sense of, I'm going to make space for myself. And successive governments have made it horrendous for self-employed people. I mean, even the so-called conservative government that we've had, you know, that is, they've done, you know, in terms of law and legislation and taxation for self-employed people, it's been a nightmare. So for the last 100 to 200 years, let's say 150, we have seen the erosion of traditional English I'm not going to say laissez-faire, but certainly independent spirit, be supplanted by a managerial interventionist state, which encourages in the average home and person a mindset of I go to work, I clock in and I go home. Of course, America has that too, but you still have. It's only 200 years old, the America. So you still have that latent sense of.
But you've got other things underpinning there. So like even kind of non-Christian friends, chatting with them around kind of work ethic in America, and they can look to America and they can say, yeah, they work long hours, they get well paid, they work flipping hard.
Yeah, they do.
And the other thing in there is people are easily fired in America, and like to right. Like we should be employing people to do good work, and they should be paying for what they should be paid for what they do.
Is it easier to get fired? Is it easier to fire someone in America than the UK?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Is that because they've got certain things written into the contract?
I mean, like,
which we don't. I mean,
well, it'll be more. Employment legislation is quite different. You know, I think we've got more legislation. Trying to fire someone in the UK is actually quite difficult,
unless you're me.
Unless your name's Aaron Edwards.
Then you get fired really quickly.
But the thing, I suppose if you've got a contentious Twitter feed, you're asking to be fired rather than having someone trying to fire you.
Sure.
So like you can get away with kind of not really doing much work.
Yeah, every work, I imagine everyone knows this in their own workplaces. Everyone's got someone, and if you don't, it's you. You know, everyone has got someone who is not pulling their weight in a workplace environment, but they know that they're just being kid glove treatment.
But the interesting thing here, you know, you've got the nanny state, you've got universities promoting this, and it's interesting how you talk to anyone who's started a business, the vast majority of them are not from university. Okay, so universities are kind of prompting you, are preparing you for employment, and not much else. And then you become employed, and you know, you get paid more as a manager. And the other thing that happens as a manager is you just sit down and don't really do any work all day. So the thing is that everybody's aspiring to be in that manager position where they can tell everyone else what to do. They can get away with kind of not really doing any hard work. It's not actually value add. And then you end up with this swell in the middle, and productivity just kind of depreciates.
And of course, information being passed from ever increasing different stations. I mean, this is just something that David Graeber noted in. So he's written 2 really good books I've read. He was actually a left-wing anarchist, but he wrote like a right-wing person about bureaucracy, because he said there's no real critique of bureaucracy from the left. So he wanted to write one, but you're like,
what would that look like?
He's like, you guys invented this. What are you talking about? But it's a brilliant book. It's called The Utopia of Rules. And he talks about higher education especially. Which I wrote an article on bureaucracy using this book. It has this graph of like the amount of academics that have been hired in universities since the 1970s goes like that, relative to the maybe amount of students. And the amount of administrators goes like that. So he said, what's actually happening? How is there more information to pass? We're inventing more information and levels to pass it to more managers. And so the academics end up going. He said, this is fascinating. He says they refer to the university. And you're like, what do you mean the university? You are the university. You work for university or college. Or the college has said, even at Cliff College we talk like that. The college says this. You know, there's only like 50 of us being employed. But like, who is the college? So it becomes the managerial class problem. Means it devolves personal responsibility in your work at every level. Because then everyone ends up going, well, this is my area. I don't need to think entrepreneurially. I don't have to think about the value of the entire organisation. I can just think, what does my manager told me to do? I'll just do that. I won't do anything else.
Something just to throw in here, in that we talk about this and we're observing the difference between the US and the UK. And when I was out there chatting with a lot of guys, and we're at it's called Workspace, this conference. And all the guys...
Cool title, by the way.
On several levels.
The pun.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of people there who are entrepreneurs, they're starting businesses, so you're not getting kind of like a fair sample across the board. But everybody that you spoke to, or near everybody, had some sort of side hustle, or were pretty young and like had a business. They're all doing something.
How many people at the conference?
So there's 270 people. But the flip side is you look at the UK and people don't have side hustles. So one of the families that I stayed with, he used to be kind of part of the leadership in the church. They just had a side hustle that was a drop shipment. And they weren't particularly at the conference. They weren't kind of driven towards that. I think they were kind of a fair sampling. Now in the UK, we don't have any of that. So my point there being that if you are going to start something, there's no one else thinking this way.
It's
There's
also
very few people to kind of compete with you,
Yes.
and like there's very few people doing hard work. So if you're going to do hard work,
you'll excel.
you're going to win.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and here as well, it's complicated by. Let's face it. Again, don't mean to sound Marxist because I'm not in the slightest. But class
You keep saying that.
You keep saying it. I keep denying it. Oh, this closet Marxist in the corner. God forbid. No, the class thing is really important here, and what it intersects with is the issue of education. Now, this is a thing for another lesson.
Another
Yes,
lesson?
yes, another lesson.
Let's
Another
bow on your
podcast.
feet,
Yeah,
please.
but no, not like that. No, but class is an important thing. So, for example, up until, let's say, the 40s and 50s, you had a structure in which you would have some education of young people, but if they're especially skilled academically, they would go to grammar schools.
Yeah.
Like, let's not get into this in full detail now, but up until the 40s and 50s, you would have kids who go to grammar school. If they're academically inclined, they would be, by definition, a minority of the total.
Yeah.
And those kids, the sole purpose of grammar schools, besides giving you, by the way, a classical education, would be to prepare you for university. And there were fewer universities. You know, Durham was founded, actually, I'm not going to tell you exactly when we're recording, but on this day, 600 years ago. It was, not 600 years ago, 1832, which was the first university to be founded in
That's
600.
very different. Yeah, okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
But the reason why I said it is because in 1832, it was founded, the first university to be founded since Cambridge University, 600 years before. So it was given as a university for Northeast people.
I didn't actually know that. So for 600 years, no one founded a university.
Exactly. Now, you had non-conformist colleges, so if you were a non-conformist, because you weren't allowed, if you were not an Anglican, you weren't allowed to go to university in Oxford or Cambridge or whatever. So you'd have non-conformist colleges, and sometimes they'd be academically better than Oxford or Cambridge, because Oxford and Cambridge...
Just say, just an American listening to that, like we just didn't allow, if you were an Anglican,
if you're an Anglican or a Catholic
go
or a
to
Jew.
university. That's what? Just do it more. It worked for several hundred years.
The bonkers thing as well is that any minister of state, civil servant, whatever else, had to take a test oath that declared they weren't a Catholic, and that wasn't repealed until the 1830s. So
we do know how to keep people out that we want to.
Different world.
We used to know anyway. We don't anymore.
So my point is that the structure of it was totally different. A university degree used to have a particular pedigree. Used to have a particular, it was aspiration. If you went to university, you were a professional. What does that mean now? What does that term professional even mean? What it used to mean is that you went to university, you were university educated, you were distinct. And, let's say working class families whose child happened to be very bright, gone to grammar school funded along the way, they would boast of the fact that they'd gone to university, the first child in ever to go.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not to go into this in too much detail, but of course we know what happened, certainly post-Blair. University education has been made more available. Red brick universities established, new universities, new colleges established.
Polytechnics becoming
the worth of a degree is diminished. Everyone has a degree, or at least a large majority. And
and then increasingly people will have masters and then more have PhDs.
So it begins to be devalued. It's like currency. It begins to be devalued. And the point there is this: what does university prepare you for? Again, traditionally a professional class. Now it's just there isn't such a thing as anymore. It's preparing you for an administrative lifestyle. That's what it's preparing you for. Before that point, if you didn't go to university, what would you go into? A business.
Exactly.
You would work potentially in the 19th and 20th centuries into a factory, but certainly you would be working. You know, and work would be much more real to you, and your dignity in work would be more important to you. This is where the trade unionist movement, whatever our differences with it would be, but there was a sense of dignity about it. Yeah, that's gone.
A value of work. It's so true that the New Labour, for those who don't understand, the 1997 landslide that Labour had here, the Left Party in the UK. And I think it was Blair's policy, Tony Blair, Prime Minister at that point, to get 50% of school leavers from A-levels or sixth form college into university. And I don't know whether they actually probably ended up probably exceeding that longer term. And so it completely does what you're saying, and it loses even the word a degree. There's hierarchy embedded in that. But when you put that in a kind of pseudo-Marxist, cultural Marxist form, you're trying to erode hierarchy all the time. So you're saying, and at the same time, degrees went up and became more like students became consumers. So they had this thing. I think they floated it on the stock market, didn't they? High Ed Biz UK. So that was the first time I think in New Labour that the university education became a kind of company or something. I don't know how it worked.
Well,
Higher Ed Biz UK was the sort of, they wanted to make it competitive.
Yes.
And so it became, we're not going to do government grants anymore, which you could argue is a more right-wing assumption, because we're not going to. But back then, I think you had to really earn the grant, and it was a smaller minority who would go, and there was a particular purpose for it. Then it became, we want everyone to go, and the fees are going to go up, but don't worry, the government will give you massive loans.
The effects
and
are
it'll be
enormous.
fine.
The effects are enormous and multifaceted.
Yeah.
Again, it has an impact, for example, on the, as you said, society used to be structured inherently just by de facto hierarchically, because you had this sense of degree, you had this sense of people at work, and that erodes it. And then it also affects the workplace, and it affects the quality of university as well. The very purpose and vocation of the university changes because it has one eye on its academic delivery and one eye on its bottom line,
pleasing the consumer and more money, and then foreign students coming in. By the way, international students pay like astronomical fees. So Oxbridge, especially, is completely eroded in its culture in many respects and quality, because they need to. If you can pay 12 grand a year or something like £3 a year, it's going to be hugely different. But just one quick other thing before you finish on the higher education, because you'll know about this as well, Nathan. The employability outcomes that have to be put into module descriptors. I'm not aware that was something that existed before Labour. So whenever you design, I designed about 25 modules probably at master's level and several at undergrad level in my time at Glyph, and obviously oversaw some at the University of Aberdeen before that. And each module has to have a clear stated outcomes of what you expect the employability outcome for every particular module. So if you're doing a module
how do you
on
measure that? How do you
Latin hermeneutics or something, how will this help someone get a job? That's how every single university module in the UK has to have a rubric for how it will help someone get employed. And that whole notion of, especially with the humanities, that completely corrodes it. So sometimes you'd find people just like, oh, what's so-and-so done on their module? Change the wording. That's what lots of departments end up doing. And some try to use that as an opportunity to make it more meaningful, but it is completely stupid because it makes people go, that isn't the point of why someone's doing this particular module. They're not thinking, how can I get a particular job or skills that would help in a particular job as a result?
It changes. I'll say this and then I'll hand over to Tom because I've talked too much. But so it changes not just all the other things mentioned, not just the workplace, not the idea of work, but it changes. You might well hear this on especially Twitter, but the competence crisis. That in itself is impacted because where are people going into after university? These people who are being given a lesser education than, say, their forebears were. They're going into positions of government or local government or hospitals or whatever else. And we can't underestimate the impact of this. If generation after generation, year after year, it changes into a more business-minded mind, the university stops being what it should be, then our best and brightest are no longer our best and brightest.
Leadership
and they're not passing on the vision. So then the next generation is even less inclined towards the high ideals we're describing. And so over time, it's like, the film Idiocracy. Over time, it becomes this, not saying people are idiots, I'm not meaning to describe it like that, but what I am saying is that education itself becomes devalued. And so you get episodes like in Friends, where Ross Geller is pilloried for being an archaeologist and having academic interests. And it's culturally acceptable. We don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. And just to
before we hold on to Tom,
go on, jump in again.
Well, that's all we've got time for. No, we'll get you back on your galleon adventures, explore your pioneering adventures abroad, because that's really what we want to hear about. But
I want to slam you guys in academia, actually.
Okay, do that as well. But one quick thing was that this whole theme, because you mentioned Friends, it's a nice to give some sitcom relief. Again, The Office, big in the UK and the US in different ways, right? We invented The Office, obviously, the comedy. And it was so successful. And the character that you're supposed to identify, well, the male character is Tim or Jim in the American Office. Both brilliant in their own different ways. But the British one is darker and more depressing than the American one. But he's the one who's wanting to go to university, funnily enough, to do what he wants to do. There is that guy who comes into the office who has had a degree and he's clearly going to move on and do something more exciting. But the reason I think it took off so much is people laughing at the mundane elements, the banal life of office life. And it's so unaspirational, and the managers are clueless, don't know what they're doing, as you were saying earlier, Tom, and have gotten to this role purely by just being around in the office for long enough to get promoted, and then that's like, oh great, I get some more money, I get some more responsibility, I've got to deal with annual appraisals, but it's all bureaucratic, and it's a hugely. I mean, me and my wife are watching the old British Office recently again, and it's such a depressing. It is still funny, but it's so depressing. Like, you don't actually feel good.
I don't think I ever saw sunlight in the entire series. No, it's deliberately... the weather's always grey in Slough.
Well, that's Betjeman wrote the poem about Slough, didn't he? Come friendly bombs and fall on Slough, which isn't fit for humans now. And it's like, it's one of these places, it's a concrete jungle. It's like, one of the, and that does something to your imagination of the entire country. So when people are looking at that, laughing at it, and they're like, that's like my job. That's my life. And the main characters are usually... those who are like, I need to be doing something, I need to get out of this. But in a sense, they never really quite escape from it. They're kind of stuck in that corporate world. And it's all part of the cultural formation that we've not been pushing back against.
Go on,
Tom.
Well, I suppose the first thing I want to do is kind of create a bit of division, actually. So in industry, we complain about academics all the time. Okay, so...
You're welcome.
The fact that academics, that you guys... You don't really work with your hands. You don't kind of add value kind of in the here and now. It's all kind of this, or a lot of it is blue sky thinking. But there's such a divorce there that those in industry, those in manufacturing, etc., academics just don't understand. And like, we ask for things, we try and engage, and a lot of the time we kind of just wipe our hands of it and
do
just
you
go.
Engage?
We definitely try. There's definitely multiple occasions.
We're about to have a real life example. This is the Amazon man. I'm terribly sorry, Tom. We're about to have a real life example of the modern economy in place here. I'm terribly sorry if he interrupts. We might have to have an awkward sort of pause in the middle. Go on, Tom. Please go.
So it kind of accelerates what we were just chatting about, in that if academia doesn't understand what industry actually needs, and you're just going to kind of perpetuate that, like, you're just going to delivering kind of subpar. I'll keep going.
You keep going.
Just kind of subpar lectures, tuition, etc. to something that isn't actually needed.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do with that other than it just accelerates it? And the idea of kind of adding value and working with your hands can't be delivered by those in academia because they've never kind of been there.
But why would you? But that historically has been. I don't think it's necessarily the case that, let's say, in medieval academia, I mean, presumably there is. I still think there would be a sort of sense of the life of the mind being separated. So are you saying?
But it's the specificity. So it's like jumping on, like, having to do it to feed vocation. If we can get away from that and be like, let's teach Latin and let's like develop the whole person.
Yeah. And
let's develop good kind of from academia rather than thinking about like, what are the specific skills that you're going to need in this job that me as a lecturer I actually just don't understand or know. Yeah. So like, let's get away from that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I think that's a very fair criticism of academics as Nathan circles the room.
Sorry, everyone.
having dealt with the faceless corporation. I think you're right. The kind of it's especially a problem in the postmodern humanities. So I don't know if it's the same. You'd be able to tell us more about whether STEM, science, technology, engineering.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Will be are the ones that they clearly engage better. But when I remember doing a postgraduate certificate in higher education teaching a few years ago, which we had to do as a sort of annual, kind of professional development, another one of these bureaucratic terms that come in, as though you wouldn't want to develop. You have to be told to develop, otherwise you'll just literally stagnate. Like, you're like, that's just amazing to me. Like, why would you have to be told? It's good to develop.
But I remember
your skills.
I remember being kind of my first job, talking to my manager and being like, where should I go next in my career? Like, asking him, like, oh, I want some development. Well, Tom, what do you want? I don't know. You tell me. Like, there's just no aspiration there. There's no understanding of kind of like
no mentoring.
What do you do?
It's actually there's no apprenticing. So this is a huge problem, and actually why to go back to the academic thing, to defend academia at root, not the modern. We don't want to defend academia today. It's an absolute train wreck in so many respects, which is why I think we need new kinds of colleges, which we'll do maybe another episode on another time. But historically, there would be a sense of mentoring and apprenticing, which probably would have involved more practical skills. So if you imagine, why is a degree 3 years? Some would argue, and there's different theories on it, but like the model of going around with disciples, someone did that for 3 years, and it did involve teaching a very high level of like thinking. and questioning and ideas, life of the mind, but in the midst of practicality as well. And I think you're right to say that the modern problem, especially of completely divorcing that from real life, is a problem. But I just want to, my defense of it would be, historically, you have needed to separate people off to say,
entirely.
You just need to go and think, and you need to go and like till the land, and that's okay. You need to not therefore think that you're better than this person or whatever. In our day, funnily enough, me and Nathan have often experienced this. We're the equivalent of the dunces because we don't know how an engine works. And like you can be talking to a mechanic who might think, historically has been told that we're the hierarchical looking down our noses because we've got PhDs and he hasn't. But actually when you talk to someone who has superior knowledge in anything, they can use it against you. So I've had that all the time. They make you feel like a complete moron, and you are a moron. You're like, I didn't know anything about this engine, and I'm dependent on it.
This flips back to the whole kind of business thing and the trade thing. Like, where are the opportunities at the moment today to start businesses? Well, say you have a plumbing problem. Where are you going to find a plumber? How many days have you got to wait to sort your boiler out? There's potentially a week. You know? And the issues there are kind of the plumbers, etc., kind of, maybe they don't have managerial skills and kind of thinking about business, etc., but they're inundated with work, so they don't need to. So they're the ones, and there are the opportunities to kind of start businesses and really serve people who need support.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm with you on the academia piece. Like, we do need people who are well educated. The proportions are way out, and that is the problem.
It also has to be a vocation. I mean, they say one of the greatest things that why do you go to university for 3 years? You're right. There's a historical model to it, but it's also the greatest gift of academic training, or should be, is time. The time and space to think. That's what it's there for.
Without the pressure.
Exactly. So, I mean, historically, that's madness that you'd even spend 3 years just thinking. I mean, in the context of history, that is absolute madness. 3 years, you'd be dead. You'd be dead after 6 months, let alone 3 years.
You'd be patronised.
Exactly. So society, certainly, let's say in the 20th century, the world of Tolkien, the world of Lewis. You're talking about obviously your space is funded as well. It's not, you don't pay for your position. Whether or not we would want to see that is a different question. My point is, you're given the space, you're given the time to think and be excellent, and there's therefore a sense of vocation of academia, that it's good to think, that it's precious to think, that you're also going to be fed into the, when I say higher echelons of society, you know what I mean, that you're actually going to
for better people.
For better,
I get it.
Well,
I get
of course,
exactly. I know what you're saying.
But what I mean is that
I'm a token guy.
You will have a role. A lot of the university, like Tolkien's friends, a lot of them go into the army as officers, and they serve in higher positions of society. My point is that a university has to have an actual end in mind, which is the delight of the mind in worship of God, and that's what it is. That's what it ought to be. But now there's no such thing. There's nowhere near the same model of university education as there used to be.
It's an ideological
70 years
camp.
ago. Yeah, exactly. Hello again, our farmer friend, working hard as we record a podcast.
As we talk, don't worry, we are working. This is work,
honestly.
Okay? Come on.
So, it's difficult, isn't it? Because in the past, this was very, very different. Now, it is a totally separate thing. And really, if I am talking to a younger person, as I often do, and they're asking me what should I do, I'm going to suggest to them by default, do not go into university. Do not do it. Start a business, become a brickie, become an electrician, go into the army, maybe not the army, but you know what I mean. Well, maybe, I genuinely have told that to people, especially, those lads of a certain kind that would relish in the discipline, and that will raise you up, and you'll see all sorts of places. But I will not default to telling them to go to university. I will say, go to university if you love a subject and your life shines out an example of someone who loves to think and is clearly gifted. Or if you have a very specific career in mind and you're an unusual young person for having an end goal. There are some, but there aren't many. Look, when I was in sixth form or in secondary school, so when would that have been for me? 97 to 2002. So I literally went to secondary school in the year Blair became Prime Minister. It was just assumed you would go to university. It was pushed on you.
Well, I mean, they get paid for university seats.
Exactly right. And so it was just assumed. It was the sausage factory. You just went through. I think we have to shift that. Certainly, let's say if we're building a Christian culture that's different, we have to shift from the assumption that university is the right place to go. Not just for ideological reasons, but because culturally you would be better served becoming a brickie. And there's actually a lot of dignity in that work.
Oh, there's loads. I think that's one of the sad things there. Like, my query is always, where is the hard work? And typically it's in the trades. It could be in being a brickie.
Yeah.
It's not in the managerial positions. They're just swollen. There's just waste there.
Presumably
to the
they're
nth
busy.
degree.
If managers listening to this they'd say, I'm busy, I'm snowed under, but are they busy with
Well, this is a
meaningful
great
work?
question.
Yeah,
like,
or is the
I
work being
think
created by
most
the
of it is a
system?
performance. It's not even created. Like, you need to look busy. You're at work to perform, to put on an act and get paid for it. You're merely the number of people who are just merely exchanging their time for a salary.
But I would say, I doubt there's managers actually sat there going, I'm making this up. I'm pretty sure that their day is busy, and then there's an internal thing within them to go, I don't think they sat there watching YouTube, presumably.
Oh no, I'm not.
But they are doing stuff, but like it's not stuff that actually
I'm not
needs
suggesting
doing. It's what Graeber would call a BS job, and he doesn't shorten that in the title of the book. He's like, there's so many jobs that people do which don't need to be done. The famous example of it was, I don't know if I've shared this before, but it's one of my favourite stories ever, maybe, non-Christian stories, of the guy who worked for the water board in Spain. And for many years, he realised that no one would notice if he didn't do his job. Yeah. And so he didn't go to work for 6 years and taught himself to be an expert in the Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza.
Wow,
So he became a Spinoza expert on his own, getting paid. And the only reason they found out is because they wanted to give him a medal for long-standing service.
That's amazing.
He's done with the Spain.
I know
And they were like, we haven't seen him for 6 years.
I know someone who effectively, not to that degree, but just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, so there are people for sure that. But I just kind of think the people who are snowed under with line managing a load of people, clearly they have stuff they're doing.
But they enjoy going to meetings.
Yeah,
they enjoy going to meetings, and they think they're valuing
efficient.
those things, and it's just a complete waste of
I
everyone's time.
did love hearing an Elon Musk quote recently, which was that he tells people to leave meetings as soon as if they're not learning anything or contributing. And he said it's more rude, he says, to keep people in a meeting, wasting their time, than rude for them to go in after 5 minutes. No, I'm leaving.
But we're almost taught that is what a meeting looks like, and that's what a manager does. So that is the performance
authority.
Where we just continue in our meeting. We kind of pretend to do work while pretending to listen.
So there are two. So recently there was a news article this very week, which I'm not going to date myself too much, but on the BBC about companies getting wise to mouse cursor movers, so you can get automated that you can attach something to a mouse that automates the movement of a mouse. Now, why? You might be thinking, what's that about?
It's a bit of software, but
is it software? I thought it was actually a physical device.
Oh, I can imagine that does exist. But I think there's a piece of software
or physical, either way. It what does it do? Why is that a problem? Well, of course, with the rise of work from home. After COVID, lots of people working from home. Companies are tracking your "quote unquote" productivity, but they're
measuring it by mouse
meaningless tasks. Meaningless tasks, and they've gotten wise to it. People are getting away with this for years. Yeah. So I'll say that, but I'll also say, look, if this guy recognises himself. I doubt he's even listening, but if he does, it's no slight on you, my friend. But I used to know a guy still know a guy. He's lovely. But he worked at a company that was making like dental products, so like internationally available dental products, especially into the American sphere. So I'm responding to your comment before and yours about what they're doing. Is it meaningless busy work? So what he was doing, yes, the end product eventually would be like a mouth guard or something like that. To in a dental environment, it would be useful. So yes, technically something is being produced, but 90% of the time when he's talking to people about his work, he's talking about having to play almost like what's the word for it? Like passing the baton, especially with American authorities like FDA and other bureaucratic agencies which have certain regulative or the EU regulations. So it's constantly playing catch up with these things, and they'll pass something through and he'll pass something back. There's the busy work to a certain extent. That's what we're talking about when we're saying, is there actual work being done? Well, yes, technically you're filling in forms, you're abiding to standards, but it is the dance of technocrats. It's the dance of
my job.
Yeah.
It's what my business does.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I'm not meaning to demean you, but I'm just saying that's what we're saying. Yes, they are busy. These managers we're talking about, they are busy. Yeah. They're doing something, and there'll be a dental guard at the end of it. Yeah. But it's still, as you're saying, Tom, I'm meaning to confirm what you're saying, which there is a dance, there's a theatre to it, which is largely self-imposed, but it's almost like one side holds to the standards, so the other side holds to the standards. This constant... It's
a kind of self-delusion as well, kind of what I was getting at, to say that I don't think they're going... I think they've convinced themselves that the jobs they're doing are meaningful. But I think so many of the jobs, and especially also in a retail-heavy world, a consumeristic world like we have in the modern West. I worked loads of retail. I don't know if you guys had retail jobs back in the day, but I worked in coffee shops and clothes shops.
A lot of coffee shops, I remember.
And it's like coffee shop is different because it's quite meaningful to make someone coffee and do it well. There's a skill, barista skill. Working in a clothes shop on a clothes floor is one of the most depressing things I think I've ever done, because you're like constantly just refolding jeans.
That's a good example.
And you've got a manager who wants you to look busy.
Yes.
So you have this, and there's nothing, and you can't actually control anything. You can't go, I'll go and rearrange this thing. No, you're not allowed to do that. Head office will tell you everything you're allowed to do. We don't need to have any agency. We basically want you to act like a robot. Just go and refold that T-shirt for the 17th time.
Crazy.
And the kind of... the entire and you don't the end product is making a little bit more money for this company that you increasingly come to loathe. Loads of people are in those situations. So how would you counsel such people as Christians? So how can you bring the kingdom as a bod? It's quite difficult, isn't it?
You have to start thinking in terms of omega. You have to start thinking in terms of telos. You have to start thinking in terms of end. What is the end? What is the end of man? To glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. And what are you doing to furnish that end? That you have to think in those terms. I don't just mean in terms of the end of your days, that teach me the measure of my days that I might gain a wise heart. But exactly, Ecclesiastes. So what is the end? And in that end, the end of that, that feels empty. That doesn't feel anything, And I understand that people are in workplaces where sometimes their work doesn't feel fulfilling, and sometimes the answer is try and see that you are glorifying God in your work. But what I'm getting at is there an end in your work? Are you actually servicing an end that is to the glory of God? Whatever you do it with thanksgiving in the name of Christ, etc. So, for example, if you're in a trade, you have a very obvious end. Every time you finish a project, a house, you have done something. If you're a blacksmith, I mean, there aren't many blacksmiths now. I'm speaking like a 19th century, but
I know one.
Well, by the way, I have massive respect for blacksmiths. I actually think they are both artist and scientist at the same time. It's amazing. Anyway, but you produce something. Okay, fine. What is the end of academia? I have an uncle. You know this because I was just giving you this mental grafter. Yeah, I was with my dad and my uncle. Both of them great. Working class guys. Worked all their lives.
Very right wing in
a brilliant way.
There's a mythical car journey Nathan and I shared with Nathan's dad and his uncle.
They're twins, by the way, so I should say.
And just like all bets are off. It was a very it was like base conversation, but it was about 12 years ago.
Way before it was Scotland.
We were like, none of this stuff. I heard these things before.
It was brilliant.
Just working class northeastern guys.
And my uncle's always been really supportive of me. Bless him. He's lived a very different life to me. Not an academic, but he once described me. My dad would say, "Oh, if you're grafter, I know you're not in like a workplace environment." And my uncle quickly chipped in with, "Yeah, but you're a mental grafter." I was like, "I like that, Uncle Vic. I like that." My point is, what are you doing academia for? Are you actually in it because you love learning? That's your end. That's an end in and of itself, although it has to be in service to the church. It has to be to the glory of God. But know what your end is. What is it? Is it to, as you're doing, Tom, are you providing something for your children? Are you providing something for your house? That's a glorifying end.
Vision.
A vision indeed. But it's not an end to just go to a clothes shop and fold jeans. No wonder you feel like you don't have any dignity.
Well, I want you to talk a lot now, but let me just set, because I know we're running out of time. We haven't actually asked you that much about the comments, but let me just set you up with one more thing, which was like, I heard a sermon the other day from 1981 on Joseph by Terry Virgo, and it's a great series because it's, for me, where the Reformed charismatic movement in the UK was far more kingdom oriented, and he was talking about work. Now we don't really talk about that much at all, or it doesn't feature much, but he was talking about Joseph as the example of someone obviously who's in a horrendous situation. Technically Joseph's job is kind of a manager when he's in Potiphar's house. And he doesn't complain about it. He does an excellent job, and he does good work. I guess there's still meaningful. You can find anything meaningful, but whilst recognizing that Ecclesiastes will remind us that our toil, that there's a kind of Hebel-like meaninglessness to it, or kind of passing of the wind. It's going to fall away. But there's a vision for, even with Ecclesiastes, there's a vision for how you go about that work well, which could be kingdom-oriented. But Joseph does well, is recognized for his good work, and ends up, Potiphar trusts him with the entire household. And then he becomes so trustworthy again, he goes to prison. He's trusted there because he's diligent, and he doesn't kind of let despair overtake him. And then, so of course there'll be Christians who you could argue, well, should that mean that Christians in these bod-like jobs get promoted all the time? It doesn't actually seem to happen that often, but you'd like it to happen. But there's something about the system we're in which is very corrupt, which makes me think if you are living properly kingdom-oriented lives, Christians are going to get more fired in some situations, but hopefully others won't, and you don't have to go and get yourself fired. It's to do a really good job, so you're harder to fire. In my situation, honestly, I would say that I was good value for the college. I'm not saying that because it's me saying it of myself. I think I was good, adding lots and lots of value. And it didn't help my case. It should have been the case. Objectively, a load of people would tell me that, why are they doing this? This is insane on loads of levels. The ideologies are so powerful, they're not even recognising common sense anymore. They're not recognising, this is good. We won't. The power of the ideology is so strong. It's like we're not even going to be rational about this. So, tell us about vision for work and stuff that came from the conference that you kind of reflect on.
Well, no one's unfireable. I hear that. You hear it in multiple places. You find it in management books. I would pose that it's not actually true. I think one of the queries that I have is, how do you make this practical? So we're talking about ends, we're talking about means, and we can talk about multiple ends. So there's the ends in the immediate thing that you're doing. How are you serving? How are you adding value? How are you blessing people through our work? Because that is ultimately what we're doing. But where's the bigger vision as well? So there's some statistic, and I'm not going to try and guess at it, about how most millionaires actually have kids. And the thing that's driven there is that you can swiftly reach a pay threshold, kind of a glass ceiling that you're not actually going to get through, but you've got loads of kids. And this is kind of the scenario I've ended up in but you've got to feed them, you've got to bless them, you've got to buy a bigger house. And how are you going to do it? Well, you've got to think outside the box, because there's no way this guy's going to pay you anymore. So you've got to go out and you've got to start building something and think differently. So, and that vision, started, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And there were kind of tangible steps, like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to learn that. And then I'm going to learn this. And then hopefully this thing will enable me to do this. And then I can do that. And then I can do that. And there's a vision in there as well. And that continues forward. So we see that kind of projected past. But that is some of the end that we need to be thinking about. Like the job that I'm doing right now, the folding clothes in a warehouse, whatever it might be, do that well. Definitely. But what is the thing that you're kind of learning either in that job, or you're researching, or you're spending your time in, so that you can do the next thing? And then the next thing, and then the next thing, and then you can build something that serves your family, blesses other people, whatever it might be.
Good.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful.
I remember when I won one of my Costa jobs, you might have come in. I might have served you a free coffee at some point.
Yeah, you used to bring back gone-off yogurts, which we'd eat editing Christian videos and things.
That is true. I built up a massive store when we lived together and in a lad's house at uni. I had a beer fridge in my room, and I had never had any money. I was just always absolutely paying rent on the bread line each month. So whenever it was like, hey, should we pool together and have this meal together? I'd be like, I don't have the cash to put up. I'd pay in Cokes. Yeah. Because I used to get 2 free bottles of Coke that you could have on shift, and I just never drank them on shift. I drank water on shift. I don't know why they give you 2, so I bought them back every day. So I had literally 40 bottles of Coke. Brilliant. So I was always able, that was my currency to save people having to go.
That's, thinking about entrepreneurialism.
There we go.
That's it. So I was chatting with a guy at the conference, and out in Texas, they love their cigars. And there's a guy and his partner. They've got a cigar business, and we were kind of chatting. And I was like, do you get much interest in the UK? And they were like, yeah, we get a little bit. And we kind of, tentatively, okay, well, what would that look like? Trying to import them into the UK. How do you sell them? Well, you've got obviously the tax, and then you've got that horrendous signage that goes all over your tobacco product. And I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of interesting. We'll put this in a placeholder, we'll tab it or whatever. And I was actually at an event yesterday around international trade and export, not thinking about cigars, thinking about kind of business networking locally, actually. But it just plopped into my head, like someone did a talk on kind of export numbers and kind of the bureaucracy that exists there. And I was like, hang on a minute, if I go chat with that guy, he might know what you do about kind of tax on cigars and tobacco product. And then there's probably someone else in here who can point me in the direction of what is the signage, or who's the government organisation that has the information to tell me what sort of signage would need to go on these products. And I'm like, well, I'll just ask. If you guys know the answer, or you can put it in writing or something like that, I can actually engage with something and be like, is this simple? Is this feasible? Is it not? And I think that's part of the big thing, and something that I'm genuinely fearful of is that a lot of people can't have conversations, and business revolves around conversations. And you end up with kids now, and I used to feel it, picking up the phone and talking to someone that you didn't know was scary, but you've got to get on with it. And ideas generate through having those conversations. And it really is who you know, not what you know.
Yeah.
But if you're not going to have conversations and meet people, you're not going to build your network, you really aren't going to get very far.
Yeah, that's interesting.
True.
That connects to lots of things, actually, in terms of technology, the role of technology and education. Like classical education used to teach kids rhetoric, so the ability to actually converse. And also the extent to which administrative jobs keep you in your lane and do not require ambition.
Squash you down.
Yeah, they don't require. You might well be ambitious, but that's a happy circumstance. You don't need to be. So we probably need to end soon. But sorry, I know I'm continuing. But
no, it's fine. No, we've got 5 minutes left, but we can. I was going to say it's interesting that on the conversations front, that entrepreneurial spirit thing, the pioneering spirit we talk about. My dad is an absolute, entrepreneur. You've met him maybe a few times.
Yeah, he's great.
He started many years ago in Jersey, Channel Island, by not knowing anything about. He became an antiques dealer, which was a wheelie dealer type thing. Del Boy, if people in Britain understand the reference. Americans will have to Google who Del Boy is. But he was a bit of a Del Boy. And he started by seeing literally a sign on one side of the island that said, "We buy silver threepenny bits for $1." No, what $1? What am I talking about? Well, I think it was 1 shilling or something. And on the other side of the island, it's a very small island, selling them for like half a shilling.
42 kilometres square. I was looking up Jersey Island yesterday.
Really?
Some bizarre coincidence.
42 kilometres, there you go.
Square.
So somewhere between the two towns and the island. And he was just like, this must be a setup. They must know each other. So he just kind of inquired, bought one, sold it to the other guy. I was like, okay, this seems to work. Have you got any more? I'll buy all of them. Do you have any more coming in? Yeah, I can get you some more. Carried on doing it. He's like, by the way, after a few sales, he's like, do you know a guy on the other side of the island who's in a similar kind of life? I haven't spoken to that expletive in 25 years. So then literally from that, he became what is actually called a numismatist, a kind of coin expert. Because he just decided, like, he was working in a hotel. He was in a bod job. And then he became a kind of coin person. He didn't have to learning on the job. That's how entrepreneurialism works. You are an opportunist. Sometimes people are doing it. There's lots of American examples of bad peddlers selling random medicines they've made up. There's a bad opportunism. I'm just trying to exploit people, which does happen in America and all capitalistic enterprises. But there's a good sense of like, right, what is there that can be good? And if you're a Christian, how can you do that to cultivate the kingdom of God? It's like a lot of the American podcasters, King's Hall guys, Cross Politic, etc. One thing that's anemic to us Brits is how big they are in advertising. We naturally go, that's just a weird American thing trying to make money. And you go, well, what's wrong with trying to make money? What is the point of that money? That's the point.
But it's not even just trying to make money.
The business? They want to promote businesses who are Christians and connect people together. As I say, networking people. And so they're saying, like, it's a bit still jarring to me when I hear it sometimes because it's like 5 adverts in a row. But you get the point of the vision. It's like, we want you to go and buy coffee from these guys, meat from these guys, go and get your body armour from these guys and stuff, which is a problem we don't quite have to deal with in the same way in the UK. But there's a reason for it. There's a vision. It's like we want to build parallel culture, which is actually better than the existing elite culture.
I think your example of your dad there is a fantastic image in that what he's doing is incredibly simple. And like we quickly, and I think academia really doesn't help this, is it overcomplicates the idea of starting businesses serving people.
Yeah, that's right.
It's really simple.
Yeah,
exactly. And we need to be doing more of it.
That's good.
Yeah. Wow. Any final thoughts, Nathan?
I don't have many final thoughts on that. No.
Latin word. Give us a Latin word.
Labor means work. There you go.
But it means
numismatic actually is interesting. It's number. It means number, which means coin.
Okay.
There you go. I'll give you that.
Wonderful. Well,
there you go.
There we are. Well,
be fit Latin.
Indeed. Well, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Defy the devil and act like men. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Christ is Lord. God save the King.
Amen.
This has been That Good Fight. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.